My former partner said I'd regret leaving the firm. He didn't know I'd just been headhunted for triple the salary. Jeffrey Harwick said it in the conference room on the 42nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows framing downtown Manhattan, like we were characters in some corporate drama. His voice carried that specific blend of condescension and threat he'd perfected over 23 years at Sterling and Associates. "You're making a mistake, David. Walk out that door and you'll regret it. I'll make sure of it." He was standing with his arms crossed, his Brioni suit perfectly tailored, his silver hair immaculate. Behind him, 3 other senior partners sat in leather chairs, watching this play out like spectators at an execution. And in my pocket, my phone buzzed with an email I'd received 40 minutes earlier from Catherine Beaumont, Chief Operating Officer at Meridian Global Partners. Subject line, "Final offer, Managing Director position, compensation package attached." I'd opened it in the elevator on my way up to this meeting. Base salary, $850,000. Signing bonus, $200,000. Equity package valued at approximately $3 million over 4 years. Total first-year compensation, $1,050,000. Exactly 3 times what I was making at Sterling and Associates. I'd been a partner at Sterling and Associates for 6 years, working there for 12 total since graduating from Columbia Law. The firm specialized in corporate restructuring and bankruptcy law, representing creditors in complex insolvency cases. I'd built my reputation handling mid-market Chapter 11 reorganizations, the kind of cases that required technical expertise and client relationship management, but didn't generate the massive fees that came from representing bondholders in billion-dollar retail bankruptcies. I was good at what I did. My clients trusted me. My associates respected me. But I'd hit a ceiling. The firm had a 2-tier partnership structure. I was an income partner, meaning I received a salary and a year-end bonus based on my billings and collections. But I didn't have equity. I didn't vote on firm management. I didn't share in the profits the way the equity partners did. Jeffrey Harwick was an equity partner. He'd made equity partner at 39, riding a wave of huge cases in the early 2000s. Now, at 56, he controlled one of the largest books of business at the firm and wielded enormous influence over partnership decisions, compensation, and firm strategy. He'd been my mentor when I first joined as a junior associate. He'd taught me how to take depositions, how to negotiate with opposing counsel, how to manage difficult clients. For years, I'd thought we had a real relationship. Then, I'd made the mistake of asking about the equity partnership track. That conversation had happened 6 months ago. I'd requested a meeting with Jeffrey and 2 other members of the executive committee. I'd prepared a presentation showing my billings over the past 5 years, my client retention rate, the associates I'd mentored who'd gone on to make partner elsewhere, the pro bono work I'd done that enhanced the firm's reputation. I'd made my case for why I should be considered for equity partnership. Jeffrey had listened politely. Then he'd said, "David, we appreciate everything you've done for the firm, but equity partnership isn't just about billings. It's about strategic value. It's about bringing in the kinds of clients that transform the firm. Your practice is solid, but it's not equity-level work." I'd asked what I could do to get there. He'd smiled, that patronizing smile I'd seen him use with opposing counsel right before destroying them in court. "Focus on what you're good at. Service your existing clients. Let the equity partners worry about firm strategy." I'd left that meeting understanding 2 things. First, I would never make equity partner at Sterling and Associates regardless of what I did. Second, Jeffrey saw me as useful but ultimately replaceable, a competent attorney who could handle the mid-tier work while the equity partners focused on the prestigious cases. The realization had been gutting. I'd spent 12 years building a career at this firm, sacrificing weekends and holidays, missing my nephew's birthday parties and my sister's wedding, all with the belief that if I worked hard enough, I'd eventually be rewarded with true partnership. Instead, I'd hit an artificial ceiling created by people who'd decided I wasn't worth including in the inner circle. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. I'd started taking calls from recruiters after that. For years, I'd ignored their emails and voicemails, loyal to Sterling and Associates despite the long hours and intense pressure. But now I listened when they pitched opportunities. Most weren't interesting. Lateral moves to similar firms, maybe a small bump in comp, but the same partnership structure and same limitations. Then, Catherine Beaumont had called. Meridian Global Partners was a boutique advisory firm that specialized in corporate restructuring and turnaround management. They worked with distressed companies to implement operational improvements, financial restructuring, and strategic repositioning. Unlike traditional law firms, they combined legal expertise with operational consulting, and they were growing aggressively. Catherine had been direct. "We've been watching your career for 3 years, David. You have exactly the skill set we need. Legal expertise in restructuring, client relationship capabilities, and a reputation for getting deals done without unnecessary drama. We're opening a New York office, and we want you to run it as managing director. You'd have full P&L responsibility, equity participation, and autonomy to build the practice however you see fit." I'd met with her twice over the following month. The first meeting was at a coffee shop in Midtown where she'd outlined the vision for the New York office. The second was at Meridian's headquarters in Chicago, where I'd met the CEO, the CFO, and 3 other managing directors. They'd been impressive, smart, and strategic, without the ego and politics that defined life at Sterling and Associates. The offer had come through this morning at 9:30 a.m., right before my 10 a.m. meeting with Jeffrey. I'd been planning to give my notice today anyway, but the timing was almost too perfect. I'd walked into that conference room prepared to resign and face whatever consequences came with it. What I hadn't expected was for Jeffrey to turn my resignation into a public spectacle. He'd invited 3 other equity partners to attend, ostensibly to discuss my future at the firm. But it became clear within the first 5 minutes that this was about sending a message. Jeffrey had started by reviewing my performance, which he characterized as adequate but not exceptional. He'd pointed out that my billings were down slightly from last year, conveniently ignoring that I'd spent significant time mentoring junior associates and handling complex pro bono matters at the firm's request. He'd noted that several of my long-term clients had been reassigned to other partners, a development I'd only learned about 3 weeks ago when those partners had started attending client meetings without telling me. Then he'd asked the question he already knew the answer to. "So, David, are you committed to Sterling and Associates? Because if you're not, we need to know now." I'd taken a breath. "I'm resigning, effective 2 weeks from today." The room had gone silent. One of the other partners, a woman named Lori Hoffman, had actually looked surprised, but Jeffrey had smiled, and that's when he'd delivered his threat about making me regret leaving. "You're making a mistake, David," he'd continued. "This firm has invested 12 years in your development. We've given you opportunities, mentorship, access to sophisticated clients, and this is how you repay that investment? By walking away? I appreciate everything the firm has done for me," I'd said carefully, "but I've accepted a position elsewhere that better aligns with my career goals." "Where?" Jeffrey had demanded. "I'd prefer not to say until I've formally started." "Bullshit," he'd said. "You owe us that information. We have non-compete agreements, David. We have client relationships to protect. If you're going to a competitor, we need to know." I'd reviewed my partnership agreement with my own lawyer 2 weeks ago. The non-compete was narrowly written and likely unenforceable in New York, but I wasn't going to debate that in this room. "I'm not going to a law firm," I'd said. "I'm joining an advisory firm. Different business model, different client base. There's no conflict." Jeffrey had leaned forward. "Advisory firm? You mean like a consulting shop? You're leaving Sterling and Associates to become a consultant?" The disdain in his voice was palpable. To Jeffrey, lawyers were professionals. Consultants were glorified business school grads who made PowerPoint presentations. "I'm joining Meridian Global Partners as managing director of their New York office," I'd said. I hadn't planned to tell him, but his condescension had pushed me over the edge. "They do restructuring advisory work. It's complementary to legal services, not competitive." Jeffrey had laughed. Actually laughed. "Meridian? That boutique shop that does turnaround work for middle-market companies? David, you're leaving a prestigious law firm to join a consulting firm nobody's heard of? What are they paying you? 300,000? 350? "The compensation is competitive," I'd said. "I'm sure it is," Jeffrey had replied. "Competitive for a consultant. But you're giving up a partnership track here, the possibility of significant long-term earnings, to chase a short-term bump in salary. It's short-sighted." I'd almost told him then. Almost pulled out my phone and showed him the offer letter. 850,000 base, 1 million total comp in year 1, triple what Sterling was paying me. But something had stopped me. Maybe it was the fact that Catherine Beaumont had specifically asked me to keep the offer confidential until the official announcement. Maybe it was the realization that Jeffrey didn't deserve to know. Or maybe it was just the understanding that the best revenge wasn't rubbing his face in it immediately, but letting him find out later when he couldn't do anything about it. "I've made my decision," I'd said. "I'll work the next 2 weeks to transition my active matters. I'll prepare detailed memos for whoever will be taking over my cases, and then I'll move on." Jeffrey had stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the city like he was contemplating something profound. Then he'd turned back to me. "Here's what's going to happen, David. You're going to regret this decision. You're going to find out that the grass isn't greener, that boutique firms don't have the resources or the reputation to compete at the highest levels. And when you do, when you realize you've made a mistake, don't come crawling back. This firm doesn't take back quitters." The other partners had shifted uncomfortably. Lori Hoffman had looked like she wanted to say something but didn't. Jeffrey had continued. "Furthermore, I'm going to personally ensure that every client you've worked with knows about your departure. I'm going to make sure they understand that Sterling and Associates remains committed to their success and that we have excellent partners ready to serve them. I suspect many of them will be relieved to work with more senior counsel." It was a power play, pure and simple. Jeffrey was making it clear that he controlled the client relationships, not me, that I was replaceable, that my departure would have zero impact on the firm. I'd nodded. "That's your right. I'll cooperate fully with any client transitions." "You'll do more than cooperate," Jeffrey had said. "You'll help us retain those relationships. You'll tell clients that Sterling and Associates is the best firm to handle their needs going forward. You'll make it clear that your departure is personal, not a reflection on the firm's capabilities. And if I find out you've tried to take clients with you to this boutique shop, I will pursue every legal remedy available, including breach of fiduciary duty, violation of your partnership agreement, and tortious interference with business relationships. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear," I'd said. I'd stood up, buttoned my suit jacket. "Is there anything else?" "Get out," Jeffrey had said. Clean out your office today. We'll have IT disable your access by end of business. You can work from home for the next 2 weeks if you want to pretend you're transitioning matters, but you're done here. Effective immediately. I'd walked out of that conference room with my head high and my stomach churning. The humiliation of being essentially fired after giving notice, the threat of legal action, the casual cruelty of Jeffrey's dismissal, it all hit me as I rode the elevator down to my office on the 38th floor. My office was modest by partner standards, about 200 square feet with a view of a neighboring building's air conditioning units. I decorated it with diplomas from Columbia and my admission certificates from New York and New Jersey bars. There was a photo of my sister and her family, another of me and my college roommate hiking in Colorado, a bookshelf full of bankruptcy treatises and case reporters, a desk covered in files and legal pads and coffee cups, 12 years of my professional life, reduced to a space I could pack up in 3 hours. I'd called Catherine Beaumont from my cell phone, stepping into an empty conference room for privacy. Catherine, it's David Brennan. I just gave notice at Sterling. It didn't go well. She'd been immediately focused. What happened? I'd explained the meeting, Jeffrey's threats, the immediate termination of my office access. Catherine had listened without interrupting. Then she'd said, First, I'm sorry you had to experience that. It's unprofessional and, frankly, beneath what I'd expect from a firm of Sterling's reputation. Second, we anticipated this might happen. Jeffrey Harwick has a reputation in the industry. We've dealt with partners leaving his orbit before. He's going to make noise, but he can't actually stop you from working for us. The non-compete in your partnership agreement is almost certainly unenforceable. And even if it weren't, we're not a law firm. We're not competing for the same clients using the same services. He threatened to go after me legally if I take any clients, I'd said. Did you solicit any clients before resigning? Catherine had asked. No, I haven't talked to any of them about Meridian. Then he has no case. David, listen to me carefully. You're about to join a firm that values you, that's willing to pay you what you're worth, and that will give you the autonomy to build something meaningful. Jeffrey's threats are noise. He's trying to scare you into staying or leaving quietly. Don't let him succeed. Take the next 2 weeks to decompress, prepare for your start date, and let us handle any legal posturing from Sterling. I'd felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. Thank you. I needed to hear that. One more thing, Catherine had added. We're announcing your hire on Monday of next week. Press release, LinkedIn posts, the whole thing. We want the market to know that Meridian is serious about New York and that we've brought in top-tier talent to lead the office. I need you to be ready for that. It's going to make waves, and Sterling won't be happy, but it's part of the game. I understand, I'd said. Good. Now go home, take the rest of the day off, and start thinking about your first 90 days as managing director. We've got a lot of work to do. I'd packed my office that afternoon, boxing up files and books, while IT stood over me to make sure I didn't take any firm property. They'd confiscated my laptop and my firm-issued phone, checked my box before I left to ensure I hadn't stolen client files or confidential information. It had been degrading, being treated like a criminal for exercising my right to change jobs, but I'd kept my composure, thanked the IT staff who were just following orders, and walked out of Sterling and Associates for the last time at 4:15 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. The next 2 weeks were strange. I'd offered to work from home, to help with transitions, but Sterling had made it clear they didn't want my help. Associates I'd mentored for years stopped responding to my emails. Clients I'd worked with for a decade were told I was no longer with the firm, without any explanation or offer to introduce them to new counsel. It was like I'd been erased, written out of the firm's history as if my 12 years there had never happened. I'd spent the time preparing for Meridian instead, reading up on their past engagements, studying their methodology, talking to Catherine and the other managing directors about the New York market and our strategy for building the office. I'd also met with my own attorney, Richard Kowalski, a partner at a boutique employment law firm who specialized in representing attorneys in disputes with their former employers. Richard had reviewed my partnership agreement, my resignation letter, and my account of the meeting with Jeffrey. They're bluffing, he'd said. The non-compete is overly broad and almost certainly unenforceable in New York. You're not taking confidential information, you're not soliciting clients, and you're not joining a direct competitor. If they sue you, which I doubt they will, we'll move to dismiss and likely win. But more likely, they'll make noise for a few weeks and then move on. Jeffrey's ego is bruised, but he's a smart lawyer. He knows he doesn't have a case. What about the threat to tell clients I'm leaving? I'd asked. That's not illegal. He can tell clients whatever he wants as long as it's truthful. If he starts making false statements that harm your reputation, then we have a defamation claim. But simply informing clients that you've resigned, that's within his rights. I'd felt better after that conversation. The legal threats were hollow. The professional humiliation would fade. And in 10 days, I'd start a new chapter that would make all of this worthwhile. The press release went out the following Monday at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Meridian Global Partners expands to New York, with appointment of David Brennan as managing director. It included quotes from Catherine and from me about the strategic importance of the New York market and Meridian's unique approach to restructuring advisory services. It noted my 12 years of experience in bankruptcy and restructuring law, my track record of successful client outcomes, and my leadership capabilities. Within an hour, the release had been picked up by legal industry publications, restructuring trade journals, and financial news websites. My LinkedIn was flooded with congratulatory messages from former colleagues, law school classmates, and clients. My phone buzzed constantly with texts and calls. And then, at 10:30 a.m., I received an email from Jeffrey Harwick. The subject line was, "Disappointing news." The body was brief. "David, I saw the announcement about your new position. I'm disappointed that you chose to join a firm that directly competes with Sterling and Associates in the restructuring space. As I told you during our last meeting, I consider this a violation of your fiduciary duties to the firm and to our clients. I've asked our general counsel to review potential legal claims. I expect you'll be hearing from them soon. Regards, Jeffrey." I'd forwarded the email to Richard Kowalski with a note. "Here we go." Richard had called me 20 minutes later. "This is exactly what I expected. He's trying to intimidate you. Forward me any communication from Sterling's general counsel, but don't respond to Jeffrey directly. We'll handle this." Sterling's general counsel, a partner named Douglas Renfro, had sent a letter that afternoon via email and overnight mail. It was 3 pages of legalese essentially arguing that my employment with Meridian violated my non-compete agreement, constituted a breach of my fiduciary duties, and potentially exposed me to significant liability. The letter demanded that I resign from Meridian immediately and refrain from any further contact with Sterling's clients or participation in the restructuring advisory market for a period of 2 years. It gave me 5 business days to comply or face litigation. Richard had reviewed the letter and laughed. "This is boilerplate intimidation. They're not going to sue you, David. The non-compete is garbage and they know it. But they had to send something to make Jeffrey feel like they took his concerns seriously. Ignore it. Let me handle the response." Richard had sent a response letter 2 days later, politely but firmly explaining why Sterling's legal position was meritless, noting that I had complied with all my obligations under the partnership agreement, and suggesting that any litigation would be frivolous and potentially subject Sterling to a counterclaim for abuse of process. That had been the end of the legal threats. No lawsuit was filed. No further letters were sent. Sterling had made their point, tried to scare me, and moved on. But Jeffrey wasn't done. Over the next few weeks, I started hearing rumors. Clients I'd worked with for years were being told that I'd left Sterling under questionable circumstances, that there were concerns about my judgment, that they should be careful about working with me in my new role. Nothing explicit enough to constitute defamation, but damaging nonetheless. Word got back to me through a former client who'd called to congratulate me on the new position. "David, I have to tell you something," he'd said. "I got a call from Jeffrey Harwick last week. He said you'd left the firm and that Sterling was committed to continuing our relationship. But then he made a comment about how you'd chosen to join a competitor, and that he hoped it wouldn't impact the quality of service we'd received. It was subtle, but the implication was clear. He was suggesting you'd done something wrong." I'd thanked the client for the heads up and immediately called Catherine. "Jeffrey's running a quiet campaign against me. He's talking to clients, planting seeds of doubt. We need to address this." Catherine had been unfazed. "We expected this. David, the best response is success. You build relationships, you deliver results, and you let your work speak for itself. Jeffrey can say whatever he wants, but if clients see value in what Meridian offers, they'll work with us. And honestly, some of his behavior might actually backfire. Nobody likes to feel like they're being manipulated." She'd been right. Within a month of starting at Meridian, I'd landed my first engagement, a mid-sized manufacturing company facing a liquidity crisis. The CEO had worked with me years ago when I was at Sterling and reached out directly when he saw the announcement about my new role. The engagement was successful. We'd helped the company restructure its debt, renegotiate supplier contracts, and implement operational improvements that returned them to profitability within 6 months. That led to 2 more engagements through referrals, and then a 4th from a private equity firm that had heard about our work. By the end of my first year at Meridian, I'd generated over $5 million in revenue for the New York office, built a team of 6 professionals, and established Meridian as a credible player in the New York restructuring market. My compensation for that first year had been exactly what Catherine had promised: $1,050,000, including my base salary, signing bonus, and year-end performance bonus. It was more money than I'd ever imagined making, and it came with equity in the firm that would vest over the next 3 years. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. I'd occasionally hear about Jeffrey through industry contacts. Sterling and Associates was doing fine, still a prestigious firm with a strong practice. But Jeffrey himself was struggling. 2 of his major clients had moved their business to other firms. His billings were down, and there were rumors of internal conflicts among the equity partners about firm strategy and compensation. I didn't take pleasure in his struggles, but I didn't feel sympathy either. He'd tried to humiliate me, to destroy my professional reputation, and to prevent me from pursuing an opportunity that had transformed my career. The fact that his tactics had failed and that I was thriving wasn't karma. It was just the natural consequence of his choices. 18 months after I'd left Sterling, I was at an industry conference in Miami when I ran into Lori Hoffman, one of the partners who'd been in the room when Jeffrey had threatened me. She'd approached me at a cocktail reception, looking slightly uncomfortable. David, it's good to see you. I heard you're doing really well at Meridian. Thanks, Lori. It's been a great move for me. I wanted to apologize, she'd said, for that meeting when you resigned. The way Jeffrey handled it was unprofessional. I should have said something at the time, but I didn't. I regret that. I'd appreciated the apology, even if it was a year and a half late. Thank you for saying that. It was a difficult day, but it worked out. More than worked out, she'd said. You're building something real at Meridian. People in the industry are noticing. And honestly, Jeffrey's behavior toward you has become something of a cautionary tale at the firm. Younger partners saw how he treated you, and it's created some resentment. I'm sorry to hear that, I'd said, and I meant it. I didn't want Sterling to implode. I just wanted to be respected and compensated appropriately for my work. Don't be sorry, Lori had said. The firm needed a wake-up call. We've been operating on this two-tier partnership model for years, telling talented people like you that equity partnership wasn't in the cards while expecting total loyalty and maximum effort. It's not sustainable. Some of us are pushing for reforms, for a clearer path to equity, for better compensation for income partners. But it's slow going. Jeffrey and the old guard are resistant to change. We'd talked for another 10 minutes about industry trends and mutual clients before parting ways. As I'd walked back to my hotel that night, I'd thought about how different my life looked now compared to 18 months ago. I was happier, more fulfilled, and significantly wealthier. I had autonomy, respect, and a real stake in the firm's success. And Jeffrey's threats, which had seemed so intimidating at the time, had amounted to nothing. 2 years after leaving Sterling, Meridian promoted me to senior managing director and asked me to oversee the firm's East Coast operations, which now included offices in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. My compensation package for that role included a base salary of $1,200,000 plus equity and bonuses that could push my total comp north of $2 million in a good year. I'd also been approached by 2 other firms about potential leadership roles, which I'd declined, but which validated that the market valued my skills and reputation. I was 39 years old, making more money than I'd dreamed possible, leading a growing practice at a firm I believed in, and genuinely enjoying my work. I'd heard through the grapevine that Jeffrey had retired from Sterling and Associates the previous year at age 58, earlier than he'd planned. The official story was that he wanted to spend more time with family and pursue other interests. The unofficial story, according to people still at the firm, was that his billings had declined to the point where the other equity partners had pressured him to step down. He'd taken a generous retirement package and moved to Florida. I'd never spoken to him again after that meeting in the conference room, and I had no desire to. 3 years and 2 months after my resignation from Sterling, I was giving a keynote speech at a restructuring industry conference in New York. The topic was, The Evolution of Restructuring Advisory, Integrating Legal and Operational Expertise. It was a subject I was passionate about, and the presentation had been well received. After I'd finished, during the Q&A session, someone in the back of the room had raised their hand. I'd called on them, and when they'd stood up, I'd realized it was a junior partner from Sterling and Associates, someone I'd known when he was an associate. David, great presentation, he'd said. I have a question about client development in this space. How do you approach building relationships with CFOs and CEOs when you're coming from a legal background rather than an operational background? It was a good question, and I'd answered it thoughtfully, talking about the importance of understanding business challenges beyond just legal issues, building trust through demonstrated expertise, and partnering with operational specialists to deliver comprehensive solutions. After the session, the junior partner had come up to talk to me. I really appreciated your insights, he'd said. I'm actually thinking about making a move similar to what you did. The partnership track at Sterling isn't what I'd hoped, and I'm looking at advisory firms as an alternative. We'd talked for 20 minutes about his career goals, the skills that would translate from law to advisory, and the firms he should consider. Before he'd left, he'd said something that stuck with me. You know, you're kind of a legend at Sterling. The partner who left and became insanely successful somewhere else. Jeffrey used to say you'd regret it, that you'd come back with your tail between your legs, but everyone can see that you made the right call. It's inspired a lot of us to think more critically about whether Sterling is really the best place for our careers. I'd thanked him and wished him luck. As I'd walked out of the conference venue that evening, I'd thought about Jeffrey's threat that day in the conference room. You're going to regret this decision, he'd said. Don't come crawling back. He'd been so certain that leaving Sterling was a mistake, that boutique firms couldn't compete, that I was throwing away my career for a short-term bump in salary. He'd been wrong about all of it. 4 years after leaving Sterling and Associates, I was named to the Turnaround Management Association's 40 Under 40 list, recognizing young leaders in the restructuring industry. The profile mentioned my work at Meridian, the successful engagements I'd led, and the growth of our East Coast practice. It noted that I'd helped pioneer a model that integrated legal expertise with operational advisory services, creating more comprehensive solutions for distressed companies. My mother had called when she'd seen the announcement. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. I know the last few years have been challenging with the transition from the law firm, but look at what you've built. Thanks, Mom, I'd said. It was the right decision, even though it was scary at the time. I remember when you called me after you resigned, she'd said. You sounded so stressed, so worried about whether you'd made a mistake. But I told you then what I'm telling you now. Trust yourself. You're smart. You work hard, and you have good judgment. Those qualities succeed anywhere. She'd been right. The skills that made me a good lawyer, analytical thinking, client relationship management, problem-solving under pressure, had translated perfectly to advisory work. And Meridian had given me opportunities that Sterling never would have. The chance to lead, to build something from scratch, to be compensated based on the value I created rather than an arbitrary partnership structure. 5 years after leaving Sterling, I'd built the Meridian New York office to 23 professionals, generating over $15 million in annual revenue. I'd been promoted to partner and given a seat on the firm's executive committee. My equity stake had vested fully and was worth several $1,000,000. And I'd received an offer from a private equity firm to join as an operating partner focused on restructuring portfolio companies, which I'd considered carefully before declining. I was happy at Meridian, and money wasn't the motivating factor anymore. I had enough. What I wanted was to continue building something meaningful. 6 years after leaving Sterling, I received an unexpected email. It was from Douglas Renfrow, Sterling's former general counsel who'd sent me that threatening letter years ago. The subject line was, "Catching up." The email was friendly, asking how I was doing, noting that he'd followed my career and was impressed by what I'd built at Meridian. He mentioned that he'd retired from Sterling the previous year and was doing some consulting work for law firms on partnership transitions and compensation structures. He wondered if I'd be willing to have coffee and talk about my experience leaving Sterling and building a career outside traditional law firm partnership. I'd agreed to meet him, more out of curiosity than anything else. We'd met at a coffee shop in Midtown Manhattan on a Wednesday morning. Douglas had aged in the 6 years since I'd last seen him. More gray hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but he'd seemed relaxed, less guarded than I remembered. "David, thank you for meeting me," he'd said. "I know our last interaction wasn't pleasant. The threatening letter about my non-compete," I'd said. "Ancient history. I want you to know I never believed we had a case," Douglas had said. But Jeffrey insisted, and as general counsel, I had to at least go through the motions. "I'm glad you didn't let it deter you from pursuing the Meridian opportunity. It was intimidating at the time," I'd admitted. "But I had good counsel, and Catherine Beaumont was incredibly supportive. They helped me see through the bluster." Douglas had nodded. "Jeffrey was threatened by your departure. You represented a new model, lawyers who could succeed outside the traditional partnership structure. It challenged his worldview, and he reacted badly, but I think he came to realize he was wrong." "Did he?" I'd asked. "Toward the end of his time at Sterling, before he retired, we had a conversation about associate retention," Douglas had said. "We were losing talented young lawyers to advisory firms, to in-house positions, to boutique practices, and Jeffrey said something that surprised me. He said, 'We're losing them because we treat them like David Brennan. We tell them they're not good enough for equity partnership and expect them to stay anyway. It's arrogant, and it's unsustainable.'" I'd felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness hearing that. Vindication because Jeffrey had finally acknowledged what I'd been saying years earlier. Sadness because it had taken him so long and cost the firm so many talented people. "Why are you telling me this?" I'd asked. "Because I'm working with firms now to help them avoid the mistakes Sterling made," Douglas had said. "And your story, leaving and building something successful somewhere else, is a powerful example of what happens when firms don't create meaningful paths to partnership and don't value their people appropriately. I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to share your experience with some of the firms I'm advising. Not publicly, but in private conversations where your insights could help shape better policies." I'd thought about it. Part of me had no interest in helping law firms that had the same problems Sterling had. But another part of me remembered the junior partners and senior associates who were stuck in systems that undervalued them. And I thought about how different my life might have been if someone had helped Sterling reform earlier. "I'd be willing to do that," I'd said, "but only if the firms are genuinely interested in change, not just looking to check a box." "Fair enough," Douglas had said. "I'll only make introductions where I think your input would actually make a difference." We'd talked for another hour about the industry, about the changes in how legal services were being delivered, about the rise of alternative career paths for lawyers. As we'd parted ways, Douglas had said one more thing. "For what it's worth, David, Jeffrey asked about you occasionally after you left. I think he regretted how things ended. He never said it directly, but I could tell. You proved him wrong, and I think that bothered him more than he wanted to admit." 7 years after leaving Sterling and Associates, I was sitting in my office at Meridian, a corner office on the 51st floor of a building in Midtown with views of Central Park. I'd just finished a call with a CEO whose company we'd helped restructure 3 years earlier. He was calling to thank me because the company had just been acquired for a significant premium, and our work had been instrumental in positioning them for that outcome. My assistant had knocked on the door. "David, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important. His name is Jeffrey Harwick." I'd been surprised. I hadn't seen or spoken to Jeffrey in 7 years, not since that meeting in the conference room at Sterling. "Send him in," I'd said. Jeffrey had walked in looking older, thinner, less imposing than I remembered. He was wearing khakis and a polo shirt, not the Brioni suits he'd favored at Sterling. His hair was completely white now. "David," he'd said, "thank you for seeing me. I know I don't deserve your time. Have a seat, I'd said, gesturing to the chairs across from my desk. He'd sat down, looking uncomfortable. I've been following your career. You've done incredibly well. Meridian is lucky to have you. Thank you, I'd said. What brings you here, Jeffrey? He'd taken a breath. I wanted to apologize for how I treated you when you resigned, for the threats, the legal posturing, the attempts to damage your reputation. It was wrong, and I knew it was wrong at the time, but I did it anyway because I was angry and felt betrayed. I'm sorry. I'd sat back in my chair processing this thing. An apology from Jeffrey Harwick, 7 years later, was not something I'd ever expected. Why now? I'd asked. Because I've had a lot of time to think since I retired, he'd said. About my career, about the relationships I damaged, about the mistakes I made, and you kept coming up. The way I treated you was one of my biggest regrets. You were a talented lawyer, a good person, and you deserved better. I told you that leaving Sterling was a mistake, that you'd regret it, but I was the one who was wrong. You've built an incredible career, and I tried to destroy it before it even started. You didn't destroy it, I'd said. You made it harder, but you didn't destroy it. I could have, he'd said. If you'd been less determined, less confident in your decision, my threats might have worked. You might have stayed at Sterling out of fear, or left, but been too intimidated to succeed. The fact that you pushed through despite everything I did, that's a testament to your character, not mine. We'd talked for 30 minutes. He'd told me about his retirement, about realizing too late that he'd prioritized the wrong things, about relationships with colleagues and mentees that he'd damaged through his need to control and dominate. He'd asked about my work at Meridian, genuinely interested, asking thoughtful questions about the advisory model and how we differentiated ourselves in the market. When he'd stood to leave, he'd extended his hand. Thank you for seeing me, David. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm genuinely sorry for how I treated you. You've accomplished everything I told you you couldn't. That must feel satisfying. I'd shaken his hand. It's not about proving you wrong, Jeffrey. It's about building a career that makes me happy, but I appreciate the apology. That takes courage. After he'd left, I'd sat in my office for a long time, looking out at Central Park and thinking about that meeting 7 years ago. Jeffrey had said I'd regret leaving Sterling and Associates. He'd been so certain, so convinced that his version of success was the only valid one, that traditional law firm partnership was the pinnacle of professional achievement. He'd been wrong. I'd built a career that was more successful, more fulfilling, and more lucrative than anything I could have achieved at Sterling. I'd made triple what they'd paid me in my first year at Meridian and had only grown from there. I'd built a practice, mentored professionals, created value for clients, and been compensated fairly for my contributions. But more than that, I'd proven to myself that I didn't need Jeffrey's validation or Sterling's approval. I'd taken a risk, trusted my judgment, and built something meaningful on my own terms. That was the real victory. Not the money, not the title, not even Jeffrey's apology. It was the knowledge that I'd bet on myself and won. 8 years after leaving Sterling and Associates, I was named managing partner of Meridian Global Partners, responsible for the firm's worldwide operations. It was a role I'd never imagined when I was a junior associate pulling all-nighters on bankruptcy filings, but it was a role I'd earned through years of building relationships, delivering results, and demonstrating leadership. The announcement was covered in the trade press, with articles noting my background as a lawyer who'd successfully transitioned to advisory work and built one of the fastest-growing restructuring practices in the country. I'd received hundreds of congratulatory messages, including one from Lori Hoffman at Sterling and Associates. Well deserved, David. You've built something remarkable. Proud to have worked with you, even if it was brief. And I'd thought about Jeffrey's threat one more time. You'll regret this decision, he'd said. Don't come crawling back. I'd never crawled back. I'd walked forward, built something better, and proved that success wasn't defined by Jeffrey Harwick or Sterling and Associates or any traditional measure of legal career achievement. Success was defined by me, on my terms, based on my values. And by that measure, leaving Sterling was the best decision I'd ever made. The phone call from Catherine Beaumont 8 years ago had changed my life. The offer to run Meridian's New York office had given me opportunities I never would have had at Sterling. The decision to leave, despite Jeffrey's threats and intimidation, had required courage, but had paid off beyond my wildest expectations. I'd gone from an income partner making less than $300,000 a year to the managing partner of a global firm making over $2 million. From someone told he wasn't equity partnership material to someone running a company with equity partners across 3 continents. From someone whose former partner said he'd regret leaving to someone who'd built a career worth celebrating. Jeffrey had been wrong about everything, and I'd been right to trust myself, to bet on my abilities, and to walk away from a firm that didn't value me. That was the lesson. Not that I was better than Jeffrey or that Sterling was a bad firm, but that sometimes the people who claim to know your future are protecting their own interests, not yours. And sometimes the scariest decision, the one that seems like you're throwing everything away, is actually the one that opens up possibilities you never imagined. If you made it this far, hit like. You've earned it.